So we are here with Fred David Padula from the United States, and Fred will answer to a few questions which might be helpful to students in education, students in art, cinema, and students who are interested in the relationship between art and education. I'll make a short introduction. Fred is a photographer, and he's permanently represented in some important American museums. And Fred is also a teacher, a professional academic teacher. He's been teaching at the San Francisco State University cinematography for many years. And he is an accomplished documentary filmmaker too. And he's famous for a series of documentaries which stand somewhere between ethnography and poetry and art and visual art. Some of his famous documentaries are, for instance, Little Jesus, a documentary about the life of the hippie community in Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco in the 1960s. Another one is called Ephesus. It is about a community of Pentecostal Americans, African Americans, and their lifestyle and the religious rituals they follow. And then there's El Capitan, which is a documentary, very famous documentary about climbing and the lifestyle of climbers in California in the late 60s. So now I'll ask Fred a few questions about art, education, and the perception of reality through ethnography, which might be helpful to you. Now, the first question, Fred, is that do you recognize yourself into this, which I was saying before, I mean, as being a director which is as much an ethnographer as a art filmmaker?
Well, I'm not an authority on ethnography and anthropology. I just look at the world around me, and if I find something that's interesting, I explore it. And sometimes it's interesting enough to explore with a camera. And in the case of most of my films, I find a subject matter which I don't fully understand. And I ask myself, what's going on? And then I bring my camera in and I say, let's see what happens. And no preconceived notions or ideas. I just let things happen. And if I get some good footage, then I edit it into a film. But sometimes you start out and it turns out it's not that interesting, either to myself or to who I think the audience might be. So you walk away from it, or maybe you think about it for a while and then maybe it can begin to make sense and might develop into something. But it's an exploration of ideas. I think that's what's exciting in life is to explore concepts and ideas and discovery. And basically, I'm discovering stuff and sharing it with the camera to you. I discover myself, but I can film it, I can share it with you. And to me, to share something I'm interested in, I'm hoping you'll be interested in. That's basically my motivation. I'm not trying to express any statistics, anything specific, literal, just impressions that I have. And hopefully when I record them well enough that you can share as I have the experience. If I'm successful, I'll reproduce it in a way that you'll have a similar experience to what I'm having in real life.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see that, for instance, some people are using your documentaries, like Ephesus, for example, as text to teach the ethnographic look to their student. In this case, for instance, a book has been written here. Can you help me to remember the name of the professor?
Dr. Frank Araujo.
Dr. Frank Araujo wrote this book about this documentary film where the eye of the camera is actually helping students to understand what it means to observe a lifestyle analytically and to draw from this observation elements of aesthetics as well, and of a deeper understanding of this culture. What can you tell us about this experience in particular? Is there anything that you think should be highlighted?
Well, there is a second film on this CD that I express this as an interview. But I discovered this church by accident. I heard the music on the radio, and the preacher, the pastor, invited people to anybody come and join us and share our experience with Jesus and listen to our music. And the music was on the radio. And then when he gave the address, I realized I was only about half a mile away. And so I pulled up and parked and walked in. I looked inside, and it was the same music I was hearing on the radio. I could hear her live now coming out the door of the church. I looked in, opened the door, I looked inside, and this woman, a big woman, grabbed my arm. She pulled me in, pulled me way into the audience where I couldn't escape, sat me down, said, "You're welcome." And I had never had this experience before, people expressing themselves through music and through their religious way of communicating with Jesus. And this was new to me. I'm not a church-going person. I wasn't then, but it was a new culture I was discovering. I thought, what on earth is going on? I was actually a little bit traumatized because it was so new and so lively and so loud. And so I went back a week or two later to talk to the pastor, and I said, I'd like to maybe make a movie. I'd never made a movie before. You have to understand, but I thought, still photographs, I'm going to capture this. So I'll make a movie. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I went, I asked him if I could bring my camera, and he says, "It's okay, sure, no problem." And so I went there for almost 2 years. It was always Sunday night, and they have this meeting. It goes on, starts around 8 o'clock at night, and it goes to almost midnight. And it just gets more and more exciting, more and more exciting. And I just thought this is an incredible phenomenon that was new to me. And so I just tried to capture it the best I could. And as I returned to the church over a period of a couple of years, I became more comfortable and more familiar, and they became more familiar with me and more comfortable. And it allowed me to be very intimate with the camera with them and capture them that you couldn't possibly do with 1 or 2 meetings. So it was a persistent familiarizing of them with me and me with them that allowed the intimacy to come through and for me to be able to capture them.
Yeah, and this community was not, a community like all others. It was special in terms that the music people in it are those who wrote "Oh Happy Day," right?
Yeah.
They were very successful worldwide after, of course, you spent your time with them.
Well, this was photographed, or film was made about 5 years before Oh Happy Day came out. I had set up a 1/4-inch tape recorder in those days. This is 1963, 64. Wait, how many years is that from now?
Oh, that's 60 years ago.
Well, they had 1/4-inch tape recorders. That was way before anything digital. And one of the people in the congregation had a tape recorder, which he lent me. And I set the microphone up and I recorded some of the sermons and the music. And one of the pieces I recorded was Oh Happy Day. And when I went to use it, the microphone cord was not good. And it made a lot of static. And I realized I couldn't use it. But there was a second song, well, there were several songs, but there was a second song, which in a way I thought was even better. The way the singer presented it, and more soul. And so I used, instead of Happy Day, I used this other piece. And I just recorded, filmed what I could. And then the last day I filmed, that was the last day they met in that building because they had raised enough money to build a new building. And so that was it. So I quit filming and they quit going there. They actually joined another church group for a year or so while they built their building. I had all this footage. I didn't know what to do with it. So I started playing with it and editing it. And it just kind of came out together as, I didn't try to I didn't try to copy a night, but it just kind of came together as a sermon, as an evening would come together. I just laid it out. But no intent of trying to be specific. Because in the end, I still don't know why these people believe the way they believe. I mean, they're just Christians, and there's nothing unusual about that. But they're able to express it in such a dramatic way. I was just captured by it. And so I edited it, and the film turned out to be a success. I entered it in a couple of festivals, and it kept winning prizes. And then I got very nervous. The fact that people would see it, like it, but be afraid to show it because they thought it was too risky to show. That was during the black movement in the 1960s. There was a lot of political stuff going on then, the Black Panthers and some other black groups. So it was a risky time, and being a young college student, I was kind of oblivious politically what was going on. People would say, "Do you mean you were in that neighborhood filming this film? Why did you even go in there? It's too dangerous." And they were just people. And so I wasn't even aware of the controversy. So there were times when people liked the film. Usually museums showed it. They weren't too worried about it. But theaters got very nervous about it. They felt, no, they can't show it because it's just too intimate, too controversial. I don't see it that way, but today I don't think it's that way, but then it was kind of a risky time because politically it was very touchy.
I understand. You said something very interesting about editing. You said that when you were editing, somehow the structure of your editing was not trying to copy the structure of a rational perception of what had happened in the church. It was rather your subjective interpretation of how an evening in the church would take place, in form of anecdotes and events and here and now happenings, I would say, right? And could you tell us more about this relationship between your subjectivity, the subjectivity of your personal perception, and the use you made of this subjectivity to create an audiovisual discourse to describe this sort of life which you filmed?
Well, first of all, I should say my background, my study, in which I got a degree, was in music composition.
Okay.
And so I sort of see things as a musical composition, where you have a theme and variations, and you develop it, and then you try to resolve it at the end, and then maybe you might have a coda or a recapitulation of what the body of the music was, and then you find a way to end it. And that's the way I was thinking, and I still think I've made my films, is almost structurally as you might structure a symphony, like maybe one movement in a symphony. And so that's my thinking process. So I'm not an anthropologist. I have no authority on any of the subjects. I just see it as material that I can structure together as a composer might take notes, a theme and variations, and try to build it into some continuity and try to resolve it. And in the end, try to make a statement that gives you an experience. And in this case, the experience was this church service. But I wasn't taking notes, well, they did this then, and then they did the collection now, and then they did this and that. It just kind of came together in terms of the rhythm and the pace and the volume level of what was happening that evening. It was many evenings, but ultimately it was one evening in the film. I took everything in to put it into one evening. I didn't feel it was important to know too much of anything about the specific people. I got to know some of them very well. I've been very good friends with the pastor. But it was really the total experience. So it wasn't important for me to say that the pastor learned this and did that and finally started this church, and that is not relevant to the structure that I was working with. It was pretty nonverbal. I mean, there's a lot of verbiage in the film, but that was not influential so much in how I structured it. It's just part of the content. And so you're seeing an impression. You're not seeing there's nothing specific. You can't write a sentence about saying this is what the film is about. All you can say is, it's an experience one evening in this particular church, but you can't say who the people are or anything. That wasn't important to me at the time. I mean, they were all individual people I got to know very well, but that was not part of the concept. It was just like I might compose a piece of music. I've got these elements, I've got a theme, these variations keep evolving, and they build, and then they pretty soon resolve, and it ends, and that's kind of how the film, as I saw the film, and I still see the film that way.
Very good. So I think we can end here the first part of our interview, in order not to have too long slices. And we'll go on with the next topic in the next part.